The Lead Icon Podcast.
Shape the future. Lead with purpose. Go iconic.
Well, Lincoln, it's finally great to have you on the Lead Icon podcast, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure. And
I know you've just recently made the big move to Denver. So how has that been settling into, I guess, a new country as opposed to good old Australia?
the difficult part of moving is really before you move. So once you're here, I mean, the first week I arrived, it was minus 25 degrees, which not much of my equipment at home or clothing is set up for. So there was some, that's going from 30 plus to minus 25 is tricky. But I have worked here, like I've come backwards and forwards to the United States a lot in my career. So to some extent, I'm quite well versed with the culture and the way things work. The thing that really surprised me is that once you are somewhere, so if you move somewhere, once you're there, your entire life that you can see is just the place that you're in. And so people go, do you miss home? And you kind of don't, because you don't see it. So you actually miss home more before you move than you do after, because before you move, you look at everything and go, oh my goodness, I'm going to miss that and that, and I'm going to miss my friends, and I'll miss this tree. And I remember when I planted this tree 15 years ago, it was only this big. And so you see all these things and you miss them in anticipation. But then you move and you don't see them anymore, so then you don't kind of miss it. So, and to some extent, my wife, who moved from Canada to Australia many years ago, says that she misses Canada when she goes back. So she doesn't miss it when she's away, but when she goes back, she sees all the things that remind her of her childhood, and she goes, oh, I miss all these things. So I think that, once you're here, living in wealthy Western countries that speak English is much the same. Wherever you are, you have cafes that have coffee, and you have bakeries that have bread. And if they're an upper middle class suburb, they have sourdough breads and tell you which farm the wheat come from, kind of like anywhere. So,
What about the work ethic, for example? I know in the States, because it's a very entrepreneurial country and they really favor founders. Have you found that there a difference in that respect compared to Australia? Like in terms of the hours and dedication?
Yeah, there's quite a few differences from a work, like if you just take the word work ethic, like, so not how hard it is to build a business, but work ethic alone. You learn very quickly here that Americans expect to get replies to their emails and their text messages very quickly in business. So if you meet someone in a business setting and then you are going to send them an email, it's normal for that email to come out, by that night. So that turnaround time is much faster. Partly it's probably people who work really hard get attracted to moving here. So I think it's probably a bit of a selection bias. People just generally have a harder work ethic, I think. But I don't know for sure, because, I'm a borderline workaholic most of the time anyway. So I'm not sure that I'm the best judge of, assessing work-life balance. From a business point of view, it's definitely much easier. Like, it's many, many times easier doing business here than in Australia. That's
fascinating you bring that up, because I find that in Australia, the response times are slower, and I'm very much operate the way that you've said. You want to connect. You need results immediately because things are changing so quick. So, like, when I look at what you've created, Lincoln, like, you've moved from working as a practicing, orthodontist, dentist, and then now you're basically growing a global educational platform. What was the impetus that made that transition for you, especially identifying how to reshape how dentists learn and grow? And then how did that translate into, RipeGlobal becoming, a thing? So
there's a few questions there. So I guess if we start with how did like, how did we decide that we should build a thing like RipeGlobal? So there's two real impetus. One was people asking us to come and teach. And so my teaching business up until COVID was relatively traditional. We flew people to places, and we flew teachers and students to places, and then the teacher taught the students or dentists. It's hard to scale that, and you can tell this because there's really never been a business that scaled that type of training globally. It's very difficult to scale flying people around the world. And the part of the reason it's so difficult is, you run out of hours very quickly. I spent most of last year commuting to the United States and back. And in a 2-week period, or like say in an average month, I would lose 4 or 5 days just to traveling. And then I'd probably lose another 4 or 5 days to jet lag, just feeling awful. And it's if you're doing that sort of travel on a regular basis, you get like quite weird effects on your mood. So if you're doing a lot of backwards and forwards, you get quite moody and like kind of bit, I don't know, dissociated, I guess. So that sort of process makes it very difficult to scale. And of course, we never really had to scale before. I mean, I wanted to scale because people were asking me to teach in more places than I could fly my body to in an average given year. But there was also no need to, because most of human history, dental practices were tiny little things with one dentist and, 3 support staff. So in the last decade or two, there's been this growing consolidation in dental practices, where you now have practices where they have 100 dentists or 200 or 500 or 1,000. The biggest one we work with has nearly 4,000 dentists. So now you have problems that you just never had before, and no one really knows how to deal with them. So once upon a time, training a dentist was self-led. If the dentist was enthusiastic, they went and learned things and they paid for it themselves and they had skin in the game. And so now we have had to become experts in change management, because now if you're trying to educate 4,000 dentists because, the very wealthy family that owns the company wants, improved profitability, now you have a very different problem to deal with. Like, first of all, you're trying to deal with people who are less entrepreneurial, because by selling their practices, they immediately become less entrepreneurial. And then you have the problem of this entrepreneurial nature that used to lead to learning new things is gone. And so why should you try harder? You're doing quite well, got no stress, you don't have a loan to pay off. So why not just cruise? So you have this really difficult problem of how do you motivate productivity and skills and excellence out of hundreds or even thousands of dentists at a time. And it's a completely different problem. So you can't solve that problem with the same techniques you use for small practices. Now, obviously, we got a lot of motivation from COVID. During COVID, no one could fly, no one could teach very much, and gatherings of people were bad. So part of what we built was to solve the problem of COVID in the short term, to deal with short-term problems of everything's cancelled and we can't fly and our courses are cancelled. So part of it was that, and then the other part of it was in the process of building that, then we realized, hey, we've built basically the perfect system for training or bringing productivity to dentists at ever increasing scale with essentially no limit. So that's the desire to do something was there before COVID. The impetus to make those really difficult decisions and make really hard things happen was because of COVID. And now that's translating into a system that deals with the modern corporate consolidation of dental practices globally.
Did you enjoy the work you were doing when you were in practice? Was that another reason why you wanted to sort of share your knowledge, or was it time for you? Did you feel it was like time for me to move on?
So I actually really liked dentistry and I was really good at it. So I enjoyed doing it. And there was always this challenge. I probably lost a little bit of the joy, not because of dentistry, but because when I started Ripe Global during COVID, I was working full time as a dentist. And then I started this quite complex business. And I was working full time in this business. So I had essentially two full time jobs. And if you do two full time jobs that are both very difficult, and then at the same time as doing dentistry, I also scaled my dental practice up so that I no longer was necessary for the profitability. So I added 4 dentists to my practice. So it went from 1 dentist to 5 at the same time as building this global training business and platform business. So I didn't miss dentistry when I stopped, but I think that was mostly because I was nearly burnt out from trying to do both roles simultaneously, not from the fact that I didn't like dentistry. Clinically, I liked dentistry a lot. It was, quite easy for me to make a lot of money doing normal dentistry. And I used to get really nice pay. Like I had a dream job. I had the perfect patients coming in that all wanted complex work and they were willing to pay for it. And they appreciated quality. And so I'd built the dream job for a dentist.
But
Just in
clearly
time.
you want more for yourself, you know what I mean? And for, and also from the problems that you identified that dentistry has, and dentistry, like most or many medical areas, can be quite traditional, right? The way we don't change how we practice. So in terms of the scaling, if we go back to Ripe Global, you mentioned the how you actually, you could ideally clone yourself to go around, which you can't really do at the moment. Nearly there, we're nearly there. But in terms of other aspects of scaling in the early stages, what have you found most challenging and at the same time, rewarding? Because scaling is not the same as growing, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you grow enough, you're going to scale at some point, usually. There's always a very difficult point where you move from the income you generate being the labor of your own hands to the labor of other people. So there's always a thing in the middle there. I think they refer to it as the valley of death, which each additional person you employ adds cost and complexity, and it reduces the amount of time that you can personally work. And so there's a period where basically your income goes down until you get to a certain number of people, and then it starts to go up. And so the things that's just difficult because let's say on average we have a bad mood once every 30 days. Okay. Once every 30 days, you have a bad mood and you're snappy at people and get grumpy and all this sort of thing. That's fine when you have one person. If you have 30 people, that basically means every single day someone's going off the rails. And so just one of the difficulties with large numbers of people is managing them all is actually exhausting. So I dealt with that by employing Kim. So he looks exhausted, so I don't have to. I mean, you don't really appreciate operations people until your business gets to a certain size. And, really at its fundamental point, operations is the job of keeping a whole bunch of people more or less on track at any given time. That's difficult. Like just dealing with, when you're in a tiny little dental practice, you don't really have to deal with the people problems because there's so few. And usually the team culture is so bad in a dental practice, and it doesn't really matter. It's like the dentist is the king, and whatever they do, that's how it goes, and everyone has to fit in with them. That doesn't work once you get to bigger groups. You have to have, a lot more effort on team culture and happiness. So that's one thing. I think the second thing that's really difficult as you grow, it's very difficult when you do new technology. With new technology, you have 2 problems. The first one is you've got to innovate and work out how to make the technology work. And then after you finish doing that, if it's new and it's disruptive, then you need to work out how to sell it, okay? Because it's not always easy to, it's like trying to sell an electric car. Each year that goes by, selling electric cars get easier, but back when they first came out, selling them was very difficult, and it took a long time to work out how. And part of it is just momentum of the industry. So learning how to market and sell a whole new way of doing something was almost as difficult as building the technology in itself.
Yeah, there's a saying, people love to buy, but they hate to be sold to. So then it's finding that balance between, well, how do you make them love to buy what I've got to sell? So with respects to your team culture, this is, your team make and break the brand, right? And how to grow. How have you developed systems, procedures? Because I work with lots of different companies, and you go from where titles have been taken out of job descriptions, middle managers have been taken out. It depends on the founders and the business. What about with RipeGlobal? What have you found what has worked for you in terms of building that team culture? And then once you answer that, I've got another one, because I'm interested to see where your culture sits in your organization.
So the culture because we're building new things, and we're raising capital, so we're getting people invest. But when you're building new things in a capital raising business, it essentially means that you are spending more money than you earn. And many of the biggest businesses in the world, like Amazon, lost money for 17 years straight. Now, you wouldn't say that Amazon is unsuccessful. And for most of that 17 years, there was continuous press releases about how Amazon was a Ponzi scheme and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just people would rather be cynical and miss opportunities than to ever get occasionally wrong by believing in something that comes true. So most people would rather miss most opportunities so that they don't ever get made a fool of by believing in one thing that didn't come true.
Mm.
And so one of the biggest hindrances to growth and building new things is just cynicism. If you're cynical, it's very difficult to be an impactful entrepreneur. So culture for us was partly driven by, we are trying to do a lot of things and we need to do it very efficiently. And when you raise capital, it's very easy to be very inefficient, to waste the money. Like if someone gives you a big check and they say, go and spend it quickly, it's easy to do that expenditure badly. So for us, it's super important to be super efficient with the money that we have and build as much stuff as possible. So that means that the most important thing is speed. The speed and the least resources that it can take to achieve whatever you're trying to achieve. So the best way to run up costs is to have a lot of middle management. So what middle management do is they don't build anything because they're not at the bottom, and they don't make big strategic decisions at the top. So they sit in between those two. And it's very easy for them to create work for themselves. So they also, if you have a lot of decisions going to choke points, it slows things down. So the culture that we developed was the one about speed. And the way you get speed is you push authority as far down the chain as you can. So a good example is the guy who runs product and education for us. When I brought this in, I said, look, make your own decisions. It's okay to make mistakes, just don't make the same mistake twice. And come to me if the potential outcome is disastrously expensive. So if it's not disastrously expensive, go and make your own decision. And so then he came to me after that and he goes, Lincoln, what do you think about this thing? What should I do? And I said, well, what do you think you should do? And he said, I think we should do this. And I said, okay, do that. And then he'd come back about 2 days later and go, hey, I got this decision to make. What should we do? And I go, what do you think we should do? And he'd go, I think we should take this option. And I said, okay, let's do that. And then the third time he walked up to me and he said, Lincoln, these are these two things I need to choose. And you're going to tell me, what do I think? And I think we should do this. And then you're just going to say, do that then, aren't you? And I said, yes. And apparently I didn't know this until later. Other people told me that the fourth time he went through the whole role playing on his own without me. He said, well, I've got this decision to make and I'm going to ask Lincoln this, and then he's just going to say, what do I want to do, and so on. So within a very short period of time, I got people to start making their own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And that means massively more efficiency and speed. And so the risk of someone making a bad decision that's wrong is there, but the cost of that is so much less than the cost of checking everyone's decisions all the time, which slows the business down dramatically. And you end up with these big choke points, and all the decisions get funneled up to the top, and then you're exhausted with decision fatigue, because most people can only make 7 or 8 big decisions a day. And so if you're getting like 50 a day, the person at the top gets exhausted and frozen. So that's the first big thing, was for people to make their own decisions. Second thing, you want people to have fun. So, I've left that largely to my COO to drive the culture of, people enjoy to come to work. People check in with them. We got rid of one-on-ones. Everyone hates one-on-ones. One-on-ones, everyone gets like all tense every week. And then you end up with some manager who spends like 16 hours a week doing one-on-ones with people. It's a complete waste of time. So the culture is have fun, work really hard, and just get stuff done. We call it GSD in the business. GSD stands for get shit done. Yeah, and then like the people who are ambitious love it because they're given authority to do things. The people who aren't ambitious don't like it at all, and they sort of, I guess, float away somehow.
I love the way you've described that, Lincoln, because you've got different leadership styles where, for example, you want your team to have that self-leadership, self-responsibility. So that's fabulous. And then you've got a lot of leaders who want the control, and that's where you get the bottlenecks, which I think that particular, I guess, model that you're built and building will definitely reflect in your bottom line, because you can't grow without people thinking for themselves, and a lot of teams, especially when you go down the organizational ladder, not that it's down, but you know what I mean, the hierarchy, they're scared to make the decision. So you empowering them. So you obviously spent a lot of time up front teaching them not how to think, but how to critically think for themselves based upon what your expectations were. Would you say that?
I'd love to say that, because it sounds really, really thoughtful and insightful, as if that's what I did. But no, I didn't have the time. Like when I took over, there was a lot of problems. So, I've only been the CEO for a few months. So there was like since June last year. So
Yeah.
I didn't have time to go through some major change management plans. So it was basically, a whole bunch of like middle management had left. Almost all of the management had left. And so it actually basically, there was no management. And I basically had to say to people, you need to sort yourselves out, make your own decisions. You know what to do, go ahead and do it. And so people are a little bit cautious, but they build confidence over time. And I think the most important thing is it's important that people don't, if people get into trouble every time they make a mistake, then of course they're not going to make any decisions. That's not that you cannot care. It's just that it's not most mistakes. So, okay, the best way to describe it is this. Probably 50% of my decisions are wrong. Because most of the time when you make a decision, you don't have enough information to have certainty. So if you wait until you have enough information to have certainty, it's already happened and it's too late. So like if you know what the stock market is going to do tomorrow, it means it's tomorrow. So there's no possibility, like you go, hey, the stock market went up. 52%. And I know that because it's now today. And so now that it's true, you have complete certainty of what you should have done, and now it's too late. So unless a decision is existential, the most important thing is that you make the decision quickly and decisively.
Mm.
And an example of this would be when you all go on holidays with your vacation friends. Okay, you get like 4 people in a car, and then the first thing in the morning you go, what should we do today? And the other person will go, I don't know, what do you want to do? And they go, well, I made the decision, what do you want to do? And so what people think is that the important thing is that someone gets the decision that they're happy with. But actually what they really want is for you to make the decision. They would rather do something they don't enjoy than make a decision. So the highest priority for most people is that someone else makes the decision. And then the way down the list is, did I like the decision? Okay. So, and if you make decisions really with, decisive speed, it gives people comfort. So an undecided question makes people anxious. A decided question makes them comfortable, even if they don't really like the outcome. So, and then if you make decisions quickly, you can also reverse decisions quickly because you're not invested. Like if you research something forever, like I'll give an example. Some people, when they buy a car, they do like a day's research and go, that's the car I want. And they organize finance and they go and buy the car. Some people get 97 magazines on cars, and then they do an Excel spreadsheet and they put weighted models in, and they think about the car for 6 months, and then they narrow it down to the style of car. And then after about 2 years, they've finally made a decision, and they think that they're going to make a perfect decision. And first of all, they're just as likely to make a mistake with their decision most of the time. Like half the time people do these big, long, elaborate purchase sequences. And then they go, I don't really like the car, because you don't really know until you have it. And then they sell it quickly anyway. So it's best, if it's not existential, so it's not going to sink the company, make the decision quickly. It's more important for it to be quick than for it to be right. And then because you made the decision quickly, if it's once you start testing it, you go, oh, it's not really working, then admit that it doesn't work and change back really quick. When you're invested, you double down on things that are not working because you put so much effort into the investment, into the decision. And now when you decide that the decision's no good, I can't back out now. I researched for a year and it has to be right. And like all of that research is out the window. And so instead of giving up on it and going, okay, it was wrong, let's kill the thing, you put more and more resources into a dead dog, and it's still dead. So that allowing that to happen and then allowing that to run through the organization means that you get double or triple the productivity out of the same number of people. And so then you could ask yourself, if I made perfect decisions, I would get 1/3 of the productivity for the same cost. And that's in itself is a massive risk.
Yes, it is. It is. And when you think about that they're backed by investment decisions, like, how you mentioned before, speed is important in your culture because, you've got capital that's been raised and it's got to be funneled in the right way so that you can, grow the business. What advice would you give to, founders? And I'm not talking about new founders. I'm also talking about founders who are really sort of building up that scale, like, that hockey stick trajectory that everyone, dreams of. What have you found in terms of, from your early investment decisions in how to start RipeGlobal? What has helped you get going faster?
Okay, so the first thing I'd say is that the most important aspect of being a founder, particularly in a capital raising business, is endurance and tenacity. Now, there was actually, I forget, I think it was like people who run Y Combinator or something went through all of the businesses they had ever funded and looked at which ones were successful. And so they rated like 5 different metrics, and they looked at the ones that were successful, and then they looked at the metrics and they tried to work out what were good predictors of success.
Mm-hmm.
And the good predictors of success, and the things they measured were the strength of the idea, the right time, right place, execution, amount of capital raised, and IP protection or something like this. And the 2 that had a strong correlation with success were execution, so basically getting stuff done,
Mm-hmm.
and right time, right place.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very difficult to build Google 10 years before Google or 10 years after Google.
Mm-hmm.
Google could only really be built at that one moment in history. So if you weren't building Google then, which is kind of luck, then too bad. There's no way I could have built RipeGlobal any other time in history than during COVID, because if I started now, it'd be too late. And if I'd started in 2015, it'd be too early. So that's the first thing is, first of all, you've got to be in the right place at the right time. And keep in mind that I've started, 3 educational businesses at this point, a conference business, which failed, a hands-on business, which was successful, and then I purposely disrupted it myself with my own cloud-based business. So out of the 3 businesses I've run, one of them failed. One of the education sort, my dental practice didn't fail. So that's the first one, is tenacity. Like, just never give up.
Mm.
When things are grim and you're sitting there going, I've got 3 weeks left until I run out of money for payroll, you don't give up. And it's also those moments where you're kind of humble because there's not much to lose at this point. So where you can do stuff like you get on the phone to all your friends and colleagues and go, hey, I need some capital. Like one time I got on the phone with some friends and I said, look, I need a little bit of capital now so that when I go and negotiate with this bigger investor, he doesn't say, hey, you're running out of money, so you're running out of money, so I don't want to work with you. So, or they negotiate pretty harsh terms. So that tenacity to never give up is super important. The problem with it, of course, is if your business is a dead dog and you never give up, then you're kind of not giving up on something that's hopeless, which can be a problem. Usually when you run out of money, that stops that. So the second thing that's really important is to pivot. So almost no one's business, there's a saying like, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Mm-hmm. My first business plan for RipeGlobal was we put all of the lectures online, and then we would build training facilities in Prague, in Denver, and in somewhere else, Sydney. So we're going to have training facilities, traditional training facilities all around the world. And then, the lockdowns went on for so long that this whole business, we were going to run out of money if we kept going that way. And then we go, okay, we need to build something different. So then we built the cloud solution. And it was only much later that we realized that process of dealing with that short-term problem built something very powerful that we probably wouldn't have built otherwise, because it was painfully difficult to build. And it's not often that we volunteer for that difficulty. So when the option of not doing it is more scary than the scariness of doing a thing, is you kind of do it. So often our biggest moments of innovation come when we are most desperate, I guess.
Mm. Did you do it on your own, or did you have a partner in crime growing RipeGlobal with you?
So I started RipeGlobal on my own, and then for the first not long after that, my brother came in and helped for a few years. He had a background in collaboration tech. And so he came in and helped for a few years to basically help build it up. As I wasn't able to just pull myself out of dental practice immediately. So during that transition period, he helped build up a lot of the operational backbone of the company. And then He went back to his tech roots after about sort of 3.5, 4 years in the business. So, and what I learned though during that process is that we often, if we've got technical expertise, we often think that we need a professional manager to come in, like we need a professional CEO and so on. And but actually it's not true. And all around the world, I'm seeing more of this trend where there's more of a trend back to the technical expert being a CEO rather than just an employed MBA. So and it's not that there's anything wrong with doing an MBA. It's just that often, particularly technology-driven things have these deep technical insights that you need to make long-term decisions. And if you're just working out how to flip the company up to the next stage of private equity, you often make short-term decisions. And so whilst you might make a quick buck for yourself, maybe for a few shareholders, you generally sink the company in the process. So because you destroy the long-term things are inherently short-term expensive. And so one of the ways you can improve profitability is to cut back on all your long-term things.
In terms of your, when you were on the path of investment raising, and I understand that you still are, because you're building a juggernaut. And from you and I have spoken before this, and what struck me and what was impressive about when we spoke is that you have a very wide understanding of not just business, but also, like you said, the technical aspect. When you were pitching to investors, what were some of the things that you learned not to do? This is especially helpful for people who are listening. What is it, like one or two things that do not do that?
It's a difficult one to answer. And I think I might actually answer the reverse, which is what did I learn that you have to do? With technical things, it's hard to actually explain the value proposition because the people who are investing are not technical in your field. So they're specialist investors often. So first of all, my first investors were all dentists. So they understood what I'm trying to do and they could see the value straight away. So for them, it's easy. They go, we understand the problem. You've got the solution. We don't see any other solution. We don't quite know how you will turn this into something big and worthwhile, but we think you will. So to some extent, they're investing in the technical understanding, but they're also investing in you if you have a reputation. So obviously, in my profession, a lot of people have known me for a really long time. I've been quite prolific on social media over 2 decades. So they kind of go, we've seen your career, we believe in you, that you will somehow make this work. So that's, and I mean, investing like in a seed round or an angel round, the technical term for the people who are investing in the early rounds is friends, fools, and family. Or you could add colleagues, I guess. The thing that I learned, particularly with dentistry, is no one understands why dentists need training. So they go, you went to dental school. Why is there any business for teaching dentists? Don't they know how to do dentistry? And so that was the single most difficult thing for me, was to condense this technical problem, which is why do dentists need training, into a simple story that a private equity investor could understand. And so that took probably a year of failed pitching. And then you go back and you rewrite your pitch deck. And then you go out and try it again, and then no, that doesn't work. And so with regard to pitching for investment, you will hear people say things like, I got rejected 99 times before someone invested. Part of the reason you get rejected so much is because you don't understand what you're doing. So you kind of have a half idea what you're doing, but you don't distill what you're doing into this simple sentence. And so as you go and pitch, and then most investors are actually really nice people. There's 2 reasons why they're nice. The first one is there's always a chance, even if they think you're completely hopeless, that they're wrong. And in the future, they realize they're wrong and they want to come in round B or round C. So they're never going to say your baby is ugly. Okay. This business that you have cherished is completely ridiculous and you're an idiot. So they won't say that. They're very polite. But they will say, hey, look, these are the things that stopped your business progressing with us as an investment. So each time you do that, then they're basically telling you how to pitch to the next person. So the number one thing with pitching is just get out and start pitching to people. Okay. Even if your business idea is half formed, you will get more feedback from the pitching process than from reading a pitch perfect thing online. I mean, for dentistry, the difficult bit was telling why do they need to be trained?
Yeah. You mentioned value proposition, and that's the holy grail to find what that value proposition is in the early days is very hard. So your value proposition, if you articulate, how would you articulate your value proposition for RipeGlobal? Because when I look at RipeGlobal, for example, you're helping dentists not only with their careers, but also, elevate their skill sets so that but isn't there also a large amount of what you do in the mindset and the personal growth? Do you want to talk to that a little bit too?
Yeah. So the value proposition for what RipeGlobal does is very simple. Dentists graduate able to do about 6% of general dentistry. They graduate with so little because two dentists went to the University of Maryland in 1837 and said, can we join medicine and become a surgical specialty? And the medicos said no. So ever since then, dentistry has been separate from the rest of surgery. For that reason, and a few other ones which I won't get into, dental schools have gone from a 3-year dental degree in 1840 to a 4-year degree in most parts of the world in 2025. Now, the amount of dental knowledge has gone up about 10,000 times in that, and we do like about 700 procedures that we didn't do back in 1840. So with 1 year of extra training, we're now in a world where the 10,000 times more dentistry. So there's no way for a dentist to know very much when they graduate. And none of the things they know when they graduate are very productive. So when you graduate, if you work for someone else, they basically won't make a profit on you for the first year or two because you're too unproductive. And so in a world where private equity is buying dental practices left, right, and center, this is now a big problem. We suddenly have businesses that care about profit, employing hundreds or thousands of dentists. And those dentists graduate unproductive. And there needs to be a way to make them productive that's basically runs at unlimited scale. And there's only one company in the world that does that, and that's us, with the ability to mannequins and train them in their office with our simulation kits. That, I guess from there, the rest of the stuff we're developing, you just kind of learn it along the way, and so technically what we're building, if you put aside the dental bit, we are building the perfect platform to train anyone who does a procedure at unlimited global scale.
Can you share a success story? You would have many. So is there a success story that you could share so that people understand the impact, of moving from a traditional approach to improving skills to what probably is a more, how can I say, convenient, efficient, and deeper?
Okay, so let's start with a single dentist. There's a dentist that we work with up in northern Canada, like way north. so far north that for her to go to one of the standard American training centers in person took longer than it took for me to travel from Australia, because she had to like drive to a tiny airport and then catch a plane from a tiny airport to a bigger airport and then a bigger airport to Toronto and then from Toronto to Scottsdale. And so it was an ordeal to get there, and she had little kids. So without the ability for her to access simulation training where she could get them kits sent to her and she could join classes online, she just wouldn't have got trained. So that's one. Then I guess another example is dentists in the UK joined our class because we train in the office. The transition to implementing the skills is faster than if you train in an outside training facility. And within 3 months, he had started to incorporate more complex procedures, which you get paid more for. And so he paid for the entire 2-year course in 3 months. And then I went back to him and I said, over the last 2 years, what's been the return on investment? And he said 25 times. That's within 2 years. And so that's just like a financial success story where the dentist, one, didn't like dentistry and was thinking about quitting. And then when he learned to do more advanced things more efficiently, it became more exciting and fun again. And then income went through the roof. At the larger end of the scale, we worked with a large DSO that's churn rate, as in the percentage of new dentists that come into the business and then would leave. Their churn rate was running at nearly 70%. And so we built, because we act like consultants to big companies, because we see so many of them, we know their problems, and we pretty much know all of their problems before they do. So we can go in and go, hey, we have seen this 5 times before. If you will allow us to, we will show you how to fix this problem in a way that won't blow up disastrously. So anyway, we went and built a new graduate training program and a bunch of other things to help transition new dentists into their business and then upskill them and then move them up the value chain with higher value procedures. And their churn rate went from 70% down to 3%. Now, the reason this is so important is when a dentist leaves an office, about 40% of their patients also leave the office because people hate changing dentists. And so then you have to not only replace the dentist, but you also have to market and replace the patients. And then the new dentist comes in, and no dentist, no matter how smart they are, immediately ramps up to full production. It takes a year or two to get all the patients to trust you, and then you have to diagnose the bigger procedures. And so it takes like a year or so for a dentist to ramp up to full productivity. So in Australia, the cost for losing a dentist out of your office is somewhere between $180,000 and $250,000. So if you've got 20 dentists a year leaving, it's big dollars. And it's not usually well accounted for. So most groups don't understand how expensive it is. Recently, I talked to Heartland, which is one of the biggest in America, and they value a dentist, they value the cost of losing a dentist at $2 million, because they go, on average, if that dentist had stayed, they would have billed another $2 million at least. So if they lose them, that's the cost to their business. So that's one of the most misunderstood costs of business, is churn of your dentist.
Churn, yeah. People, I know, especially with so much training that's put into them, it's very costly. So you mentioned, Canada, England, and so you're a global company. I want to explore this idea of homogeny versus diversification when it comes to your product base or your service base, because it's a bit of both. Do you have to adapt your marketing, your product, your even your tech to different geographies, or are you finding that with the global world that we live in, you can be more homogenous?
I think there's a place for specialist bakeries that make sourdoughs, but most people eat supermarket bread. Okay. So the vast majority of bread eaten in Australia is supermarket bread, and then you get a little bit of, like, we also on Sunday or Saturday go down and buy a fancy loaf and so on. But most people are not buying the fancy loaves every day. Some do, but most are not. So there's always going to be room for boutique groups, but the way we will deal with that, if you think about Amazon actually is incredibly bespoke for you. So when you log into Amazon, you get a different website to me. Everyone's Amazon experience is unique for them. So there's a huge algorithm and AI inference engine that's running that says, on Tuesdays, Lincoln wants to see this sort of stuff. Okay. And to some extent, we know that companies like Amazon often know people are pregnant before the people know they're pregnant, because there's like these little changes in buying patterns. So with data, you can actually make large scaled platforms deliver bespoke experiences. I wouldn't say we're there yet, but aspirationally, that's where we'll end up.
And that's expensive, that omni-channel approach. Would you say that with AI that will change?
Best way to think of it is that scalable software is always very expensive for the first customer. It's the same price for the millionth customer. So if it costs you $1 million to build something for one customer, then once you get to 1 million customers, it's like $1 each. So the great thing about software is that it costs the same for a lot of customers as one. And the worst thing about software is it costs the same amount for the first one as everyone. So that, like, software is often misunderstood as something that doesn't have huge, it doesn't have the big capital costs of hardware, because we do both software and hardware. It's not really true. Like, you account for it differently, but software actually has quite big capital costs. Like, you often have programmers sitting there paying all their wages, and they have to build something for a long time before you make $1 out of it. But dentistry is so similar all around the world. It's so similar. Like, everywhere in the world, dentists lack confidence to offer procedures. They're scared about the procedure. And everywhere in the world, dentists get anxious about telling patients how much stuff is going to cost and having that big fight about why is it so expensive and so on. So, like, dentists are on average more afraid of the cost of dentistry than the patient is. So, because it's like such an awkward thing to say. Look, say I can do this thing for you, but if you can't afford it, then too bad, you can't have it. So that aspect is pretty much the same everywhere in the world. In the UK, people don't like to pay for dentistry, and dentistry is expensive. In Southeast Asia, people don't like to pay for dentistry, and that's expensive. In America and Australia and South America, all the same. The only time you don't get that is when someone goes from a rich country to a poor country and engages in labor arbitrage. So they get cheaper dentists because they're in a poor country, and they are paying for it with their rich dollars. So, and then if they do enough of that, then the prices equal out anyway. Like, I remember when implant dentistry in Thailand was super cheap, and then after a while, it was about an airline airfare cheaper than an Australian dental practice. So it's
catches up eventually. Yeah. What about AI?
we will eventually, in the not very near future, not very distant future, so within the next month or two, allow other educators to use our platform. And so that then solves the problem of bespokeness, because you can have, like, an educator who teaches a tiny niche can also use our platform and teach globally.
Oh, that's brilliant. That would be a nice game changer. What about AI, Lincoln? How are you without giving away your confidential competitive advantages? How do you see AI transforming, especially this space that you're in?
Yeah, so I guess the first thing with AI is it's so ubiquitous now that it's somewhat of a commodity. So putting AI on stuff, like, increased the valuation 2 years ago, and putting AI on it now is like saying it's pink. Okay. The vast majority of AI stuff that people talk about is actually just putting skins on language models.
Yeah.
So the vast majority of stuff that you see on dental websites that says AI is actually just
Machine learning and
yeah, it's not even that exciting. It's just a user interface that connects to ChatGPT.
okay. Hmm.
So either ChatGPT or SuperGrok or
Hmm.
one of those. And so it looks like, oh my goodness, look, it listened to my voice and wrote all my dental notes. But on the back end of that, it's just ChatGPT, and they've put like a user interface on the front. So that the value with that really sits with the language model people, not with the person who's putting a skin on the front. So for us, AI is most important because we are developing mannequins now that give real-time feedback on the dentist training while they're training. And that's patented both for dentistry and other industries. So that's more difficult because you need a data set. So we have a data set that we've built over the last 5 years from all the courses we have run. So all the videos and photographs that we've developed from training. So without the data set, it's kind of difficult to build that. But, it's not impossible. It's just difficult. So if you don't have a data set because you haven't been doing this, and pretty much no one else in the world has been doing what we're doing for the last 5 years, then it's going to be difficult to catch up. I think that obviously AI will get continuously cheaper. So, we've seen the ease of using AI and the ubiquity just skyrocket. So I think if you don't have a unique data set of some kind, then it's going to be difficult to compete because actually most of the information is held by the language model that you're using as your back end.
I really am grateful that you said what you said about the AI and the distinctions, because it's been overly exaggerated and the expectations gone, I think, way. It's I guess a lot of people don't understand the different complexities in the subsets that make up AI, and that pure AI is a completely different beast, so to speak. But if we look at now your user experience on the platform, so I think I'd like to explore a little bit more of the tech and the platform with you, because I think what you've created is phenomenal. So how do you ensure that the whole user experience, because you've not just got the website, you've got the actual training modules and the interface, the mannequins. How do you ensure that that's continually improving? To improve your customer experience?
I mean, there's a couple of ways that we ensure. I mean, one of it is just sort of a general desire to not go broke. So, if you don't continually improve your customer experience, like people will forgive you in the early days because they go, okay, it's like beta version, and we understand that it's, it's kind of good, but it's a bit clunky. But the thing about technology is that once people have seen it once, then they just become used to it and they think it's normal. So once upon a time, a refrigerator was the most mind-blowing thing that you could ever have in your household. And so if you remember the time before refrigerators, you will never stop thinking it's amazing. But your children who were born in a house with a refrigerator will never, ever care. It was always there. And so like the best example of recent time is recently SpaceX, caught a rocket. The rocket came down and the little arms came out and caught the rocket in midair on 2 tiny pins. And that's the most mind-blowing piece of engineering. But the second time you watch it, you just go, oh, yeah, nice. And after, oh, they missed one. That's terrible. Like you just get to the point where you just think it's normal. So if you don't improve technology very rapidly, your customers become very unforgiving because at some point they just go, we expect it to work. So, I mean, the way to improve technology, it's very difficult to improve it if you're not using it. So one of my board members told me you should roll your technology out sooner than you want to, because it will never work until you have people using it. So we, like with our new learning management system, which we rolled out 4 weeks ago, and it's probably one of the best in the world now, because it does all the things that you could ever want one to do, and it still looks nice. So we rolled it out and it was clunky as hell. Like it was, colors were weird and the buttons didn't work. And sometimes you couldn't add a friend and connect. And so then we added a whole bunch of people in. So we had about 50 people using it. Like we have, the old platform has thousands of people on it, but the new one had like 50 people in it. And they're all complaining. Okay. And we told them it was going to be clunky and they're all complaining about all the things. But because there's just so many ways to test a platform and you can never try them all. And so until you have like 100 people running around inside a piece of software, you can't find the bugs forever. So user experience, you can never get really good until people are using it. So you at some point have to just admit that it's like a bit shit and please start using it. And then be transparent with them. Say, look, we know it's buggy. Get in there. Here's the spreadsheet. Add all of the comments, or here's the ticket place where you can put in maintenance tickets. And you will improve it more in 3 weeks than you did in the previous 3 months of trying to find everything. Because it just, like, I don't know, there'll be some, it's like moving into an Airbnb. There'll be some person who, you know, decides to use the bathroom lock downstairs in the basement when they've had the shower running for 30 minutes and the humidity is just enough to make the wood swell. Like no one would ever test that unless you have a customer who sits in the shower for 30 minutes and then you get someone stuck and they can't open the door.
Yeah.
Like you're never going to know that in testing because the carpenter is just going to shut the door, turn the shower on for a minute, open the door, and then he goes. So yeah, if you want to have good user experience, you got to get people using your stuff.
It was really interesting that you raised the thing about rolling out innovation, and like when you look at, you know, the big companies like Apple, and you know they won't release all the innovations on their phones and their you know their devices because but they've already developed them in years ahead. Do you know what I mean? So they have them all scheduled in certain time. Is that something that you do too? Have you taken on that strategy?
So I think there's a lot of different companies that roll innovation out in different ways. And the thing that matters in success of business is speed of innovation. So if you roll out an innovation and it's perfect, but you're really slow. And I'll give you an example of this, which does relate to Apple. So Intel made a type of chip, and I can't remember it, but it was easy to get high performance out of it, but it was very power hungry and the rate of performance increase was slow. So back when they invented the iPhone, Apple used the other type of chip, which I can't remember the name of either, and it was a bit less stable, used very small amount of power, but was like much lower performance. So it was like 1/10 of the performance of an Intel chip. But because it used so little power, you could increase, the rate of increase was faster. So if you just drew a graph, there's one graph that's like way up high, it's like 10 times higher, but its rate of improvement is low. And there's another graph which is 10 times lower, but its rate of improvement is higher. And unless something changes, it will eventually take over. And so there was a period about 2 years ago, I think it was about 2 years ago, where Apple suddenly started bringing out their M1 chips, and then suddenly they were better. And so the rate of innovation eventually caught up with the regular chips, and now Apple has chips that are faster and more performance than other people. And so suddenly the performance there. So that's the important thing, is rate of innovation, not how good you are right now. So if your software or your user interface or your hardware is absolutely perfect in every way, but it takes you a really long time to develop and you're very slow, at some point you will get overtaken by someone who develops faster. Now, speed is painful because when you do things fast, you make more mistakes, more things break. You have to be more transparent with your customers and say, I'm really sorry, we did this thing and that didn't work. But and you also have to disrupt yourself. So if you think about my own company, I actually had to basically make my previous company fail by shutting it down to start the new company with a new technology. And most companies are not willing to disrupt themselves. And the way they get disrupted is they just go broke.
So if you could go back to when you started, RipeGlobal, what would you do differently?
The only thing I would do differently is quit dentistry sooner.
Okay.
So to some extent, dentistry was like a safety net for me. I probably could have quit sooner, really.
And does that mean you'd be comfortable with no income? You'd say you'd be, what would you, because a lot of people would grapple with that.
I think if you're a technical expert in any sort of field and then you become an entrepreneur, you can expect your income to go down. Your wealth goes up, but your income goes down. So it is definitely difficult with dentistry, because dentistry, the income is quite high and it's quite hard to match that doing other things. But it doesn't generate any value. So I have generated more value in the last 5 years than in the entire rest of my career combined. But I still earn less on a cash basis than if I'm just doing procedures all day. So,
when you say generate value,
more wealthy, but I don't earn more cash from my income.
So when you say generate value, because some people might not understand that, what are you specifically alluding to? What do you mean by generating value? So I think that's very important.
So everyone has their own way of looking at this. My personal view is, and I've had some investors agree with this, not all. When you are solving a big problem in the world and you're focused on solving that problem, and it's a problem of value to a lot of people, then you are creating value for people, customers, the profession you're in, the area of expertise. Now, in general, not always, but in general, the more value you create by solving this problem, the more financial value you also create. But most of the people who generate a lot of financial value, it's not their first focus. It's just like a side effect of trying to solve a problem, which they're passionate about. So like right now, I have investors who are offering me tens of millions of dollars to do other projects, like side hustles. Like one guy said, hey, there's a certain type of business I think you'd be super useful for, and we can raise $50 million and go and do that thing. The problem is I'm not passionate for it. So I have to find a CEO or something to run that thing because I'm not interested in it. But, I could possibly make a lot of money just as a side hustle. RipeGlobal itself is making me enough wealth, I guess. So, but yeah, I don't sit there. Like there is financial targets. I think that RipeGlobal can grow into a multi-billion-dollar business, but that's just like the mathematical extension of what we're doing. Right now, that's not my problem. My problem is, how do I build a platform that delivers the most amazing training for proceduralists in the world that's far superior to any other way? And so that's a big, valuable problem. And so the value I'm creating is the solution to that problem. And the side effect of creating that value is it also creates shareholder value.
Yeah.
And you kind of need both. Like without money, the world stops going round. If you focus on money, then you tend not to build something super useful.
It's so true, Lincoln. And like I like reading the CB Insights reports, because they really drill into, especially like the zombie unicorns, and there's a lot about them. And I really appreciate companies that have that pain. Not that building any company is easy, but sometimes when you get a massive cash injection, it doesn't mean success. So I completely agree with you on that. Now, looking ahead, because there's a lot of predictions, because we like to think about what's ahead, so that founders, business owners, leaders of businesses can really sort of, I guess, plan so that when, certainly we can't predict what will happen, but what do you think are 3 predictions that are based about what you foresee that you foresee happening in business? This is like a general question, not just for RipeGlobal. What are we looking at that we have to be aware of?
The first prediction is that over the next 5 to 10 years, everyone is going to get massively productive because they will be able to leverage AI and robotics to amplify what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, people are building like solar panels everywhere, which means that there's just this massive increase in electricity generation that's cheap. Like it's far cheaper to build solar panels and a battery. If you put solar panels and a battery on a nuclear power plant site, it generates more power for the same area than a nuclear power plant, and it's like massively cheaper. So we're going to enter an age where there's a ton of power. Life will get incredibly convenient and everyone will get super productive. And probably that means that everyone will be sad because throughout history, the less people have had to struggle, the more sad they get. And so it might be like the mouse experiment, the like perfect mouse haven, where they put all the mouse in like a little mouse paradise and all the mouse got depressed and stopped having sex and they had no babies and then they just kind of died out. And so, I don't know. I think the search for meaning is going to become more and more valuable as stuff becomes cheaper and more ubiquitous, which will then bring back authenticity and stories. Like there's a lot of things we buy now that we don't need to buy. We just buy because we like to start. Like no one needs a Swiss watch. Why do you buy a Swiss watch? Well, I mean, it shows off that you're rich, but also it's the silliness of going for thousands of hours of mechanical effort to build a watch with last century's technology. So, it's basically an exercise in trying to find meaning in a story.
Mm-hmm.
No purpose to it. Like, the best way to tell the time is with a phone. It's like atomic precision, changes time zones. I don't wear a watch, but so, and I think, whilst we like to talk about the health benefits, I think sourdough breads, the whole story of you had to wait for the sourdough starter to grow and then you do like some 3-day process. And this starter dates back to 1842 when it was brought over from such and such country on some sailing ship. And like probably largely bullshit, but who cares? In fact, the stories are so important. There's a chain, I think it's a chain of pizza shops or something in Italy where they just made a story up. The whole backstory and the whole history of the company is completely made up and everyone knows it, but everyone still loves it anyway.
This
story.
is it. You know how
Stories are the new currency.
You know how you said will lead for us being very depressed. When you look at, the cycle of civilization, like when a civilization starts, there's, it's hard because we're rebuilding. And then you go through, the growth, and then there's about 5 stages. And apparently the last stage is where we're really comfortable. And then we basically, cannibalize ourselves, not eat each other, but, and I find that really interesting because I'm part of a group of, founders, and we were talking about this the other day, and one of my friends was saying how one day robots will be taking, doing, some work, which will mean that it will plummet the price, the wage rate, which means that anyone with excessive debt will be in a lot of trouble. So it was just interesting having these conversations because God knows what will happen. But I do believe, like what you said, if we have more time on our hands, then we don't tend to put it into productive ways. Where they say we'll use our brains more, but I don't see anybody using their brains more when they're, scrolling social media all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that obviously, it's easy to have correct predictions, except about the future. So,
Correct.
I think that it's very difficult to predict what will happen. I think that the rise of AI and robotics will be slightly slower than people expect in the first few years, and then massively faster in the end. Like,
Yeah.
like if you even follow the progress of ChatGPT and Grok, it's like an arms race going on between these AI agents at the moment, and they're getting really good. Like when they first started, you could tell they were AI.
Yeah.
So look, I think that life will get. I'm not one to look back to the old days, like people scrolling on phones. If you go back in history, people used to complain about watching television was going to ruin everyone's brains. And then before that, people used to complain about everyone sat on the train reading their newspaper and no one talked to each other and it was going to rot their brains. And then before that, comic books were a great scandal when they first came out and all the kids were reading comic books and that was going to rot their brains. And so throughout history, there's no way to say this. Older people always complain about the things that younger people do and how it will rot their brains. And I think you can go back and find, and also complain about the younger generation not working as hard. You can go back to, I think, Aristotle, and he, in some of his writings, complained about the youth of today and how they didn't work near as hard as he did, basically wasters. And if he could have complained about them scrolling on social media, he would have. So I think, my kids don't work less hard than I did. They probably work harder at school now. So I don't know. We'll sort it out.
You're absolutely right. And I think we humans, at the end of the day, we're in control and we will correct ourselves, so to speak. But if I gave you a magic wand, Lincoln, what would be one thing that you'd want to solve right now?
The thing I'd want to solve is knowing all the things you know as a parent when it's nearly too late for your kids. Like you realize that everyone, when they're got their first child, they're just making shit up. They have no idea what to do. Okay. They think they do. Like their confidence is sky high. Actual ability to raise children is terrible. And then as they go through, if you have more than one child, you kind of start to realize that most of the stuff you thought doesn't actually work. And then by, whatever your last child, you're doing the best things ever. And by then it's pretty much too late. By the time you work it out, your kids have left home. So, that's my personal experience. You could know how to be a parent of many children before you had the first one.
Yes, that's like building a business. you learn as you go. Lincoln, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed, speaking to you today about, especially around all of it basically, because a lot of people struggle with building a business, whether they're at the first stage or, it doesn't matter what stage they are. It can be quite isolating. And that's why these conversations are important, because people realize that never give up. So I really am grateful for your time and for spending some time sharing how RipeGlobal is going well. And so if there are health professionals out there listening, especially dentists, where can they reach you?
RipeGlobal.com, or they can message me on Instagram or LinkedIn. Not on Facebook because I don't check it very often. They can message me at those places, or and it depends. If they need help with their training, then RipeGlobal.com. If they're interested in investing, then go to the investor page on RipeGlobal.com. And we have so many things coming down the pipeline. It's crazy. So it's at the fun stage. Actually, the last thing I would say, if you're an entrepreneur, the first 3 or 4 years are shit, okay? And it's only about year 5 where it starts to become fun. And so what tends to happen is you go, oh, it's too hard and I'll give up, just before it gets fun.
That's true. There's a chap I follow on Instagram, and he does all these like stocks. He shows you what stocks are coming up and down. And he did a piece on, Apple when they hit their $1 billion, turnover, and it took, years. So you're absolutely right. It's patience, very much patience. Well, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. It's important to share these things, because if I think as business, especially small, fast growing businesses that end up becoming bigger businesses, we need to support each other, because we are not just the future, but we look after a lot of people in the meantime.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Well,
Lincoln.
it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.